You're coming with me. A vampire king found a human woman shivering at station, then took her home. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The wind howled through the darkened streets, a biting cold that swept across the empty station platform. Marissa shivered, clutching her worn-out coat tighter around her fragile frame. Her breath puffed in the frigid air, turning to mist as she waited for the last bus of the night. She had barely enough money for the ride, but her luck seemed to have run out. The night was long and empty, the city streets echoing with the sound of distant traffic, but no warmth, no comfort. Her feet ached from a day spent working 2 shifts, and she could barely keep her eyes open as exhaustion dragged her down. The station was nearly deserted, save for a few shadows in the corners, figures who seemed as lost and weary as she was. She glanced down at the cracked pavement, her mind wandering to the small apartment she called home. Her grandmother was waiting, her only family, who relied on her every day. As the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the station, Marissa looked up, startled. A black car, sleek and shining under the dim lights, rolled to a stop in front of her. The engine purred like a predator stalking its prey. The door opened, revealing a tall figure. His presence was commanding, almost otherworldly, as if the very night itself bent around him. He wore a dark coat that billowed like a cape, his face half hidden in shadow. His eyes, dark, piercing, met hers, and for a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Marissa's heart skipped a beat, a strange chill running through her as she tried to look away. But something about him held her in place. Are you lost? His voice was deep, smooth, like velvet wrapped in steel. Marissa's throat tightened. She took a cautious step back, unsure if she should run, or simply nod and walk away. But she couldn't. Her body was frozen by the magnetic pull of his gaze. She had seen men like him before, rich, powerful, dangerous. But this man, there was something more. Something ancient. She opened her mouth to respond, but words caught in her throat. He stepped closer, and she instinctively took a step back, only to bump into the cold metal of the station bench. You don't need to be afraid, he said softly, his gaze never leaving hers. I can help you. Marissa didn't know why, but she felt a strange pull towards him, something she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the loneliness in her heart, or the desperate need for warmth. I don't, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't give her a chance to finish. Without another word, he extended a hand, his fingers long and graceful, but with a strength that was impossible to ignore. You're coming with me, he said, his tone brokering no argument. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Marissa's heart raced as she stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She had no choice. In a moment of hesitation, she stepped forward, her hand brushing his. A shock ran through her like electricity, and she gasped. His eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something else behind the coldness. Something ancient, something that spoke of a life far beyond her understanding. Before she could think about it any longer, he gently but firmly led her to the car. Get in, he instructed. Her legs trembled as she climbed into the back seat, and as the door shut behind her, she felt the weight of the night press down on her. What had she just gotten herself into? She didn't know, but something inside her told her that this man, this vampire king, was about to change her life forever. The car glided smoothly through the quiet streets of the city, its dark windows reflecting the glow of streetlights as they passed. Marissa sat in the back, her hands clutching the edge of the seat, still in shock from the events of the past few minutes. She had no idea what had just happened, or why she had gotten into the car with a complete stranger, let alone a man who seemed so different. The silence in the car was thick, the only sound the soft hum of the engine and the occasional clicking of the driver's fingers on the steering wheel. Marissa's heart raced, and her mind was a blur of confusion. Who was he? Why had he offered to help her? As the car turned down a side street, Marissa couldn't help but glance over at the man sitting beside her. His dark eyes were fixed straight ahead, his expression unreadable. He had an air of confidence, of power, that made her feel both safe and uneasy at the same time. "Where are we going?" she finally managed to ask, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't immediately respond. His gaze flickered over to her, his eyes narrowing just a fraction before he spoke. "To my home. You'll be safe there." His voice was low, almost hypnotic, and it made her skin tingle. She nodded, unsure of what to say next. The streetlights outside flickered as they drove further into the night, the cityscape becoming less familiar, more desolate. Finally, the car slowed and turned into a long, winding driveway. Marissa felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The mansion in front of her was massive, its dark silhouette looming in the night. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, old, gothic, and otherworldly. The car came to a stop in front of the grand entrance, and the driver got out, opening the door for her. "Come inside," the man said, his voice carrying an unmistakable command. Marissa hesitated for a moment, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. She was alone with a man she barely knew, in a place she didn't recognize. But something about him, something deep in her gut, told her to follow him. She stepped out of the car and followed him up the grand staircase to the entrance. The door opened silently, as though it had been expecting them. Inside, the mansion was just as eerie as its exterior. Marble floors, towering ceilings, and grand chandeliers that cast long shadows across the hall. Everything was so perfectly arranged, it felt as though the house had been frozen in time. "Welcome," the man said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Marissa looked around, feeling small and insignificant in such a grand setting. The man led her down a long corridor, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As they walked, she couldn't help but glance at the portraits that lined the walls, old, faded faces of people who seemed to stare at her from the past. Finally, they stopped in front of a large door. He turned to her, his eyes locking onto hers. "This will be your room for tonight. Rest. You need it." He opened the door, revealing a large, luxurious bedroom. The bed was massive, covered in dark, velvet sheets. The room was warm, comforting, yet it felt so foreign to her. It wasn't like anything she had ever seen before. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure of what else to say. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense, as if searching for something. "You'll be safe here," he said finally, his voice softer now. "But you have to stay. There's no turning back from this." Marissa swallowed, her throat dry. She had no idea what he meant, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded, too exhausted to think clearly. As she moved to sit on the bed, the man turned and walked toward the door. "Get some rest," he said over his shoulder before he left, closing the door behind him. Marissa lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She was in the home of a man she didn't know, a man who seemed so out of place in her world. And yet, she felt strangely safe here, in his presence. She didn't know what to expect next, but one thing was clear. Her life had just taken a turn she couldn't have imagined. The darkness of the night pressed in around her, but she felt no fear. Something inside her told her that she was meant to be here, even if she didn't fully understand why. As she closed her eyes, the faint sound of distant music echoed through the mansion. It was haunting, almost magical, like the house itself was alive. And as the night stretched on, Marissa couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. The soft glow of the morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Marissa stirred in the massive bed, her body still wrapped in the warmth of the soft velvet sheets. She had never felt such comfort in her entire life. The night had passed uneventfully, but her mind was still racing with thoughts of the man who had brought her here. The Vampire King. She had heard the rumors about him, whispers of his power and mystery, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. The door to her room creaked open, and she turned to see him standing there, his figure framed in the doorway. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, it felt as though he could see straight into her soul. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but commanding. She sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes, still groggy from sleep. "Good morning," she replied, her voice hesitant. The events of last night were still a blur, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was caught in something far bigger than she understood. He stepped into the room, his presence overwhelming. "You slept well, I hope?" he asked, his tone almost gentle, though there was still an air of authority in it. She nodded, unsure of how to respond. She had no idea what he expected from her, or why he had chosen to help her. "Come," he said, extending a hand toward her. "I want to show you something." His words were an invitation, but there was no question that it was also a command. Marissa hesitated for only a moment before swinging her legs off the side of the bed and standing up. She followed him through the grand corridors of the mansion, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the vast halls. The walls were lined with old portraits, their eyes following her as she walked. She couldn't help but feel like an intruder in this ancient, mysterious world. Finally, they arrived at a large, open room, its high ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers that sparkled in the morning light. The room was empty except for a large table in the center, covered with maps and old books. "This is my study," he said, his voice softer now, as though he were showing her something personal. He gestured to the table. "This is where I keep track of everything. My kingdom, my people, my past." Marissa approached the table, her eyes scanning the pages before her. She had no idea what any of it meant, but she could sense the weight of history in the air. "I don't understand," she said quietly, turning to face him. "What is all of this? What do you want with me?" The Vampire King's gaze softened for a moment, and he stepped closer to her. "I told you before," he said, his voice low. "You are important to me. You are the key to something I've been searching for." Marissa frowned, confused. "What do you mean? I'm just a delivery girl. I don't have anything special." He shook his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are far more than you realize, Marissa." She felt a shiver run down her spine at the sound of her name on his lips. He had said it as if it were a secret he had unlocked, something only he knew. "But I don't belong here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't even know who you really are." The Vampire King's expression hardened, but only for a moment. "I am the Vampire King. I have lived for centuries, watched time pass by, and witnessed the rise and fall of countless lives. But you," he paused, his voice suddenly softer. "You are different." Marissa swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always been a survivor, but nothing in her life had prepared her for the man standing before her. A man who was not just powerful, but ancient, mysterious, and capable of changing her life in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. "I don't know what you expect from me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't be what you want. I'm nothing special." The Vampire King took a step closer, his eyes intense. "You are special, Marissa. You were brought to me for a reason. And once you understand that, you will see that you belong here, with me." She felt her breath catch in her throat as he spoke. His words had a weight to them, a certainty that she couldn't ignore. She didn't know what he meant, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel like she was part of something far greater than herself. "I don't belong here," she repeated, though her voice wavered. "I don't even know who you are." The Vampire King's gaze softened again, his lips twitching into a faint smile. "You will learn, in time. But for now, trust me. You're safer here than anywhere else." He stepped back and turned toward the door. "Come, I'll show you the rest of the house." Marissa followed him, her mind still racing with questions she couldn't answer. She had no idea what her future held, but something in her gut told her that she was tied to this man in ways she couldn't yet understand. As they walked through the mansion, Marissa felt the weight of his presence beside her. This was only the beginning. What would come next? She had no idea, but her life would never be the same again. The mansion was vast, more like a kingdom than a home, with hallways that stretched endlessly, each room grander than the last. Marissa followed the Vampire King down another dark corridor, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. She felt small in this world, as though she were walking through a dream she couldn't escape. The doors they passed were all identical, carved with intricate designs that Marissa couldn't even begin to understand. They finally arrived at a large wooden door, its surface covered in ancient symbols. The Vampire King pushed it open, revealing a room even more breathtaking than the rest of the mansion. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with ancient tomes and scrolls, their pages yellowed with age. A large, ornate desk sat in the center of the room, papers and books scattered across it. "This is my study," he said, his voice low. "Here, I keep track of everything. The history of my kingdom, the secrets of my people, and the knowledge of the world." Marissa stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took in the room. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, filled with an aura of ancient power and mystery. She ran her fingers lightly over the spines of the books, her mind racing. "How long have you been alive?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away, and for a moment, she wondered if he had even heard her. But then, he spoke, his voice smooth and detached. "A long time. Longer than you can imagine." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Marissa's mind was still struggling to comprehend the reality of her situation. A vampire king, a creature of legend, and she, a simple human, was now here, in his world, in his home. "Why me?" she asked, turning to face him. "Why did you bring me here?" He looked at her, his gaze piercing. For a moment, she thought he might say something cryptic, something that would only leave her with more questions. But instead, he spoke plainly. "You are the key to unlocking something I've been searching for, something that has eluded me for centuries." Marissa's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "There is a curse," he said, his voice low and filled with a kind of sorrow that Marissa hadn't expected. "One that has haunted my family for generations. It is the reason my son has been trapped in a deep sleep for 50 years. And it is the reason I brought you here." Marissa's breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers of such things, curses, dark magic, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel too real. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "How can I help with something like that?" The vampire king stepped closer, his presence filling the room. He placed a hand on one of the ancient books, tracing its cover with his finger as if it held the answers to everything. "The curse is tied to blood," he explained. "Your blood, to be precise." Marissa took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "My blood?" she repeated, disbelief creeping into her voice. "How is that possible?" "You carry the blood of the witch who cursed us," he said, his eyes darkening. "And with that blood, you have the power to break the curse. But it will come at a price." Marissa felt the floor beneath her shift. She had no idea what he was talking about, no idea how her blood could be tied to a curse that had lasted for centuries. "I don't know what you're asking of me," she whispered, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. He turned to her, his eyes softening, though there was still an intensity there that made her uneasy. "I'm not asking for your help lightly," he said. "I've waited a long time for someone like you, someone who could change everything. But I cannot force you to do this. You must choose." Marissa stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She was caught in a world she didn't belong to, tangled in something she didn't understand. The vampire king, a centuries-old creature of power and mystery, was asking her to help him break a curse that had held his family in its grip for generations. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time since she had arrived at the mansion, she felt the full force of the situation. "What will happen if I refuse?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The vampire king's expression darkened. "The curse will remain, and my son will never wake," he said, his voice cold with a hint of finality. "But more than that, my kingdom will fall. Without your blood, I cannot break the spell, and everything I have built, everything I have fought for, will be lost." Marissa's heart pounded in her chest as the gravity of his words settled in. She wasn't sure what kind of power she had, or what role she was meant to play in this strange world, but one thing was clear, her decision would change everything. She was standing on the edge of something far bigger than herself, and whether she was ready or not, she had a part to play in the Vampire King's story. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he stepped closer, his voice soft but filled with a strange intensity. "You already have," he said, "and you will. In time, you will understand what it means to be part of this world." As he turned to leave the room, he paused, looking back at her. "Rest. Tomorrow, we will begin." Marissa watched him disappear through the door, her heart still racing. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The stillness in the air was heavier, as though the house itself was waiting for something to happen. Marissa awoke in the large bed, the sheets cool against her skin. The faint light of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting shadows that seemed to stretch across the room. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of the vampire king and the strange world she had found herself in. Her heart pounded in her chest as she thought of the choice that lay ahead, whether to help break the curse or to walk away from this bizarre and dangerous life. But she knew there was no turning back. She had already stepped into this world, and now she had a part to play in its fate. As she rose from the bed and moved to the window, she saw the mansion's grounds bathed in the soft glow of early morning light. The garden stretched out before her, a maze of hedges and flowers that looked both beautiful and ominous. She could hear the faint sound of birds chirping in the distance, a stark contrast to the heavy silence of the house. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see one of the servants standing there, a polite expression on their face. "The king requests your presence," the servant said, bowing slightly before stepping aside. Marissa nodded, her heart skipping a beat. She had no idea what the vampire king wanted from her, but she knew it was time to face him again. She followed the servant through the grand halls, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The mansion seemed even quieter today, as if the air itself was holding its breath. When they reached the study, the servant knocked on the door before opening it, revealing the vampire king sitting at his desk, his back to her. He looked up as she entered, his piercing gaze meeting hers. "Marissa," he said softly, his voice almost like a whisper. "Come in. We have much to discuss." Marissa stepped inside, her nerves tingling with anticipation. He gestured to a chair across from him, and she sat down, her hands folded in her lap. "I know you are confused," he began, his voice calm, yet full of a quiet intensity. "You're caught between two worlds, unsure of your place. But you must understand that the choice you make will not only affect me, but the future of my kingdom, my people, and my son." He paused, his gaze softening for a moment as he looked at her. "I brought you here because I believe you are the only one who can break the curse. You are the key to it all." Marissa swallowed hard. "I don't understand how I'm supposed to do this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just a girl. I don't have any special powers, no magic." The vampire king's eyes locked onto hers, his expression serious. "You are more powerful than you realize. The blood that runs through your veins is not ordinary. It carries the essence of the witch who cursed my family, and it holds the power to undo everything that has been done. But it will require a sacrifice." Marissa's mind raced as she tried to process his words. "A sacrifice?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of sacrifice?" He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "To break the curse, you will have to make a choice. Your blood will be required to undo the magic that binds my son in his eternal slumber. But in doing so, you will tie your fate to mine. You will become part of this world, a world that you may not fully understand, and you will carry the burden of the curse until it is lifted." Marissa felt her breath catch in her throat. "But what if I don't want to be part of this world? What if I want to leave?" The vampire king's expression darkened. "There is no leaving, not if you want to save my son. The curse is tied to everything, my family, my kingdom, my legacy. If you refuse, my son will remain trapped, and the curse will continue to haunt us all. But if you accept, you will have the chance to end it, to break the chains that have bound us for centuries." Marissa felt the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She had never imagined that her life would take this turn, that she would become the key to undoing an ancient curse. She had always been ordinary, just a girl trying to survive, and now she was being asked to carry the fate of an entire kingdom in her hands. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The vampire king stood up and walked around the desk to stand in front of her. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to be strong, Marissa," he said softly. "You only have to choose. The strength will come when you decide." Marissa looked up at him, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her soul. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: her life was no longer her own. The choices she made now would shape the fate of everyone, and the burden of that responsibility felt heavier than anything she had ever known. But deep down, a part of her knew she couldn't turn away, not when so many were depending on her. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice steady now. The vampire king nodded, his eyes softening just slightly. "First, you will have to come with me. We will go to the heart of the curse, to the place where it all began. Only then will you truly understand the magnitude of what you are about to do. He turned toward the door, and Marissa followed him, her heart beating faster with each step. She didn't know what would happen when they reached the heart of the curse, but she knew that there was no turning back now. She was already caught in the web of fate, and whatever happened next, she would face it head-on. Together with the Vampire King, she would confront the curse and whatever darkness lay ahead. The Vampire King led Marissa through the mansion, his stride steady and confident, as if he had walked these halls 1,000 times before. She followed closely behind, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the situation had settled heavily on her. She had no idea what was coming next, or what exactly she was supposed to do. All she knew was that she was about to face something that would change everything. As they walked deeper into the mansion, the air grew colder, the walls closing in on her. The house, which had once seemed so grand and mysterious, now felt like a maze, each turn leading her further into unknown territory. They passed through more corridors, the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the silence. Marissa felt a shiver run down her spine as she wondered what was at the end of this journey. They finally stopped in front of a large, ornate door. The Vampire King turned to her, his expression unreadable. "This is where it all began," he said, his voice low. "The heart of the curse." Marissa's stomach tightened. She wasn't sure what to expect, but the intensity in his voice made her feel like they were about to step into a place of great power, perhaps even danger. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a large chamber. Inside, the room was vast, its high ceilings lost in shadows, the only light coming from flickering candles placed around the room. The walls were adorned with tapestries, each one depicting scenes from a time long past. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, surrounded by symbols Marissa didn't recognize. The Vampire King stepped inside, his presence filling the space, and Marissa followed him cautiously. "This is the place where my ancestors sealed the curse," he explained, his voice almost a whisper. "This is where everything began." Marissa looked around, her eyes drawn to the altar in the center of the room. It was carved with ancient symbols, intricate and mysterious, and at its base, there was a faint red glow, like the pulsing of a heart. She felt a strange pull, as if the altar was calling to her. "What am I supposed to do here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The Vampire King turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "You must use your blood," he said. "Your blood is the key to unlocking the curse." Marissa's heart skipped a beat. "My blood?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "How can my blood be the key?" The Vampire King's gaze softened. "Your blood carries the power to break the curse. It's tied to the witch who cursed my family, and it holds the magic that can undo everything." He stepped closer to her, his voice becoming more urgent. "But you must understand, this is not without sacrifice. If you do this, your fate will be forever linked to mine. You will become part of my world, bound by the magic of your blood." Marissa's mind raced as she processed his words. She had no idea how her blood could hold such power, but she could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. She wasn't just caught in a conflict between two worlds. She was being asked to make a choice that would tie her to this ancient, powerful being forever. "And if I don't do it?" she asked, her voice small. "What happens then?" The Vampire King's face darkened, the weight of centuries of pain and loss evident in his eyes. "If you refuse," he said, his voice low, "the curse will remain. My son will never wake, and my kingdom will fall into ruin. The curse will continue to haunt us, and everything I've fought for will be lost." Marissa felt a lump form in her throat as the magnitude of the decision settled in. She could refuse, walk away from this world, and go back to the life she knew. But in doing so, she would condemn the Vampire King's family and the kingdom to an eternity of suffering. She glanced at the altar, the red glow still pulsing, beckoning her. "What must I do?" she whispered, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. The Vampire King nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "You will place your hand on the altar, and you will offer your blood," he said. "The magic will recognize it. It will be the first step in breaking the curse." Marissa's heart raced as she stepped forward, her eyes locked on the altar. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, as if the very room was alive, waiting for her to make the choice. She extended her hand, hesitating for only a moment before placing it on the cold stone surface of the altar. The moment her skin made contact with the stone, she felt a jolt of energy surge through her, like an electric shock running through her veins. The symbols on the altar began to glow with a red light, and Marissa's heart beat faster. She could feel the power of the curse pulling at her, trying to drag her into its depths. She gritted her teeth and pushed through the sensation, focusing on the task at hand. The Vampire King stepped behind her, watching closely. "Now, you must offer your blood," he said softly. Marissa took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She closed her eyes, summoning the courage she didn't know she had. Slowly, she pricked her finger on a small shard of stone that had appeared on the altar, letting a drop of blood fall onto the surface. The moment the blood hit the stone, the room seemed to tremble. The red light grew brighter, and a deep, rumbling sound echoed through the chamber. Marissa felt the magic pulling at her, a force stronger than anything she had ever known. She opened her eyes to see the symbols on the altar shift, the energy in the room growing more intense. The curse was awakening, and with it, the beginning of something that would change everything. The Vampire King stepped forward, his gaze fixed on her. "It is done," he said, his voice filled with both relief and a hint of sadness. "The first step has been taken, but the path ahead will not be easy." Marissa took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle heavily on her shoulders. She had taken the first step, but the road ahead was uncertain. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: she was no longer just a girl trying to survive. She was a part of something far bigger, and her life would never be the same again. The Vampire King stood motionless, watching Marissa as she withdrew her hand from the altar, still feeling the pulsing energy in the room. The red glow from the ancient symbols had faded, but the tension in the air remained, thick and unyielding. She could feel it deep within her bones, the power that had just been unleashed, the magic of the curse that had begun to unravel. She had done what was asked of her, but now the weight of the decision pressed heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next, but there was no turning back. The Vampire King's expression remained unchanged, his eyes hard but somehow soft, as if he were holding back emotions he couldn't fully express. "It has begun," he said, his voice low and steady, but there was a trace of something else in it, a hint of relief mixed with something darker. Marissa took a deep breath, feeling the blood still tingling in her veins, as if it were alive, pulsing with power. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "Now we wait," he replied, stepping closer. His presence seemed to fill the room, as if it were alive in its own right. "The curse is not broken yet. Your blood has opened the door, but there is still much to be done. The path to the cure is long, and it will not be easy." Marissa nodded, swallowing hard. She hadn't expected it to be easy, but the reality of what she had just stepped into was overwhelming. She had always been just a girl, someone trying to survive. Each day, and now, she was at the center of a battle that could determine the fate of a kingdom. "What do I need to do next?" she asked, the weight of the decision still heavy on her chest. "You must come with me," he said, his voice soft but firm. "There is a place where the curse's power is strongest. It is there that we will confront it. Only by facing it head-on can we destroy it once and for all." Marissa felt a shiver run down her spine at the thought of facing such darkness. "And what if I fail?" she whispered, the fear in her voice barely contained. The Vampire King's eyes softened, though his gaze was still intense. "You will not fail," he said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "You have already proven that you are stronger than you realize. You are the key to ending this. I will stand by you, every step of the way." She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that she could do this, but doubt lingered in the back of her mind. She was still just a girl from the streets, a nobody. How could she possibly save them all? But the Vampire King's words, his presence, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could. "Okay," she said, her voice firming as she made up her mind. "I'll do it. I'll face whatever comes next." The Vampire King gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said simply. "Come, it's time." He turned and walked toward the door, and she followed him, her mind still swirling with questions. They moved through the mansion in silence, past dark hallways and empty rooms, until they reached a small door at the back of the house. It was simple, unadorned, almost as though it were hiding in plain sight. The Vampire King reached for the door, and Marissa felt a strange tug in her chest as he opened it. Beyond the door lay a narrow stone staircase that spiraled down into the depths of the mansion. The air was damp and cold, the walls lined with centuries-old stone. She followed him down the stairs, each step echoing in the silence. The further they went, the darker it became, until they were enveloped in total darkness. Marissa's heart raced as the tension grew thicker with each passing step. What was at the bottom of this staircase? What was waiting for them? Finally, they reached the bottom, and the Vampire King stopped in front of a large, iron door. He turned to face her, his expression solemn. "Behind this door lies the heart of the curse," he said softly. "This is where we must face it, where we will destroy it once and for all." Marissa nodded, her throat dry. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing. This was the moment where everything changed. The Vampire King pushed the door open, and they stepped inside. The room was vast, its high ceilings disappearing into darkness. The air was thick with the scent of ancient magic, as if the very walls had been soaked in it for centuries. In the center of the room stood a large stone pedestal, its surface cracked and worn. Upon it lay a glowing red crystal, pulsing with dark energy. Marissa felt a chill run down her spine as she looked at it. "This is the source," the Vampire King said, his voice low. "The heart of the curse. If we can destroy it, the curse will be broken." Marissa stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the power of the crystal pulling at her, a dark force that seemed to seep into her very soul. The Vampire King stood beside her, his eyes never leaving the crystal. "You must touch it," he said. "Your blood has already opened the path, but you are the one who must destroy it." Marissa's hand trembled as she reached out toward the crystal. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but she knew that there was no turning back. The moment her fingers brushed the crystal's surface, a surge of energy exploded through her, a powerful force that sent her stumbling backward. The room around her seemed to crack and shudder as the curse's power fought against her. But she refused to let it win. With every ounce of strength she had, she pushed forward, focusing on the task at hand. She could feel the darkness fighting her, but she could also feel the light inside her, the strength that had always been there, waiting to emerge. And then, with a final, overwhelming push, the crystal shattered. The power of the curse dissipated in an explosion of light and energy. The room fell silent, the air still once again. Marissa stood there, breathing heavily, her heart racing. She had done it. The curse was broken, and with it, the chains that had bound the Vampire King's family for centuries were finally shattered. The air in the chamber had grown still, the oppressive energy that had filled the room slowly dissipating. The crystal, now shattered into a million pieces, glowed faintly as if the curse was still trying to cling to life. Marissa stood there, her hand still trembling from the impact, her heart racing as the room seemed to settle around her. The Vampire King had stepped back, his expression unreadable, watching her closely. Slowly, he approached, the power in the room still vibrating, though much weaker now. "You did it," he said softly, his voice a mixture of awe and relief. Marissa could barely speak. The shock of the moment had left her stunned. She had done it. She had broken the curse. But the price was heavier than she had anticipated. Her body felt drained, as though the magic had taken everything from her. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice weak. The Vampire King nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the shattered remnants of the crystal. "Yes," he said, his voice low and filled with a kind of reverence. "The curse is broken. My son will wake. The darkness that has bound my family for centuries has been lifted." Marissa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was done. The weight of everything she had carried had finally been lifted. But as the Vampire King stepped closer to her, something deep inside her stirred, an unease, a feeling she couldn't shake. She turned her gaze toward him, searching his face for any hint of what came next. He wasn't just a man. After all, he was a Vampire King, and his world was a far cry from hers. "What happens now?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like a cloud that refused to disperse. The vampire king stopped before her, his dark eyes meeting hers with a seriousness she hadn't expected. Now, you must choose, he said. You've broken the curse, but the consequences of your actions are far-reaching. You are now tied to my world in ways you cannot yet understand. Marissa's heart skipped a beat as his words sank in. She had known there would be consequences, but hearing them spoken aloud made it feel all too real. Tied to your world? She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. What do you mean? The blood that flows through you, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. It has bound you to me, to this kingdom. You may not realize it yet, but you are now part of something far larger than yourself. Marissa shook her head, trying to process the weight of his words. I don't belong here, she said, her voice shaking. I'm just a girl who stumbled into your world by accident. I never asked for any of this. The vampire king's gaze softened slightly, but there was still an undeniable firmness in his expression. It doesn't matter whether you asked for it or not, he replied. The choice is yours, Marissa. You can stay with me and be a part of this world. Help me rebuild what was lost. Or you can leave, return to your life. But know this, no matter what you choose, your life will never be the same. His words hung in the air, heavy and final. Marissa's mind raced. Could she go back to the life she had before? The quiet, mundane life where she had to struggle just to survive? Or was she meant for something more, something greater than she had ever imagined? She had broken the curse, and in doing so, she had stepped into a world she hadn't fully understood. The life she had known was slipping away, and now she was faced with the impossible decision of choosing a future that was unknown, but potentially more powerful, more dangerous than anything she could have imagined. She took a deep breath, her thoughts spinning as she tried to process everything. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice low. The vampire king stepped closer to her, his expression softening further. No one ever truly knows what to do when faced with such a choice, he said, his voice gentle, almost reassuring. But you must trust in yourself. You've already proven that you have the strength to change the world. You can choose your path now, and I will help you along the way, whatever you decide. Marissa's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She could leave. She could walk away from all of this, return to her old life, even though she knew it wouldn't be the same. Or she could stay. She could accept this new world, the world of power, of vampires, of ancient magic, and stand beside the vampire king as he rebuilt his kingdom. The possibilities felt endless, and yet they all seemed so impossible. She had always been a survivor, but could she survive in a world that wasn't hers? She felt his gaze on her, steady and unyielding. His presence, his power, his centuries of experience. It was all there, waiting for her to choose. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, or what exactly she hoped to find in him, but she knew that she couldn't make this decision alone. I don't want to be alone anymore, she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The vampire king's eyes softened even further, and for the first time, she saw something in him that wasn't just power or authority. It was understanding. You won't be, he said simply. Whatever path you choose, you will never be alone again. Marissa felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of peace that she hadn't expected. Maybe this was the choice she needed to make. Maybe it wasn't about going back to the life she knew. Maybe it was about stepping into something new, something terrifying, but ultimately worth it. I'll stay, she said, her voice steady now. I'll stay with you, and I'll help you rebuild. The vampire king nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Then it's time to begin, he said, and with that, they turned together to face the future, whatever it may hold. The days that followed Marissa's decision felt like a blur, her life moving at an accelerated pace, everything changing around her in ways she couldn't keep up with. The vampire king, now her companion, her protector, guided her through the complexities of his world, but there was still so much she didn't understand. She had agreed to stay, to help him rebuild his kingdom, but the weight of her decision was only beginning to settle in. Marissa spent her days learning the intricacies of vampire politics, the ancient laws that governed their lives, and the delicate balance of power that had kept the vampire king's kingdom intact for centuries. She had never been a part of a world so full of secrets and shadows. where every word spoken could carry the weight of 1,000 consequences. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, she began to find her place. The Vampire King's presence, once intimidating, had become a source of comfort. His strength and wisdom guided her, but there was also something else, something deeper. Marissa had begun to understand him in ways she hadn't expected. Beneath the centuries-old exterior, he was a man burdened by loss, by the weight of a curse that had nearly destroyed everything he held dear. And despite the darkness surrounding him, there was still light within him, a light that Marissa had come to rely on. The castle, once cold and empty, now felt like home. She was no longer just a guest, a stranger in his world. She was part of it, a member of his court. But there was one thing that still unsettled her, the question of what came next. The curse had been broken, but the Vampire King's kingdom was far from stable. Enemies lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And with each passing day, Marissa felt the weight of the responsibility growing heavier. What had she truly stepped into? Was she ready for this new life, this new purpose? She had asked him that question one night, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens. The Vampire King had turned to her, his expression unreadable, before answering. You were chosen, Marissa, not by me, but by fate. You have a role to play in this world, whether you realize it or not. And though the path may be difficult, you are not alone. The words had stayed with her, echoing in her mind long after he had left her side. And she knew, deep down, that he was right. She had been chosen, but not just by fate. She had chosen this path, too. And with that choice, she had committed herself to a future she could no longer ignore. As the weeks went by, Marissa became more involved in the kingdom's affairs. She was learning the intricacies of vampire politics, sitting in on council meetings, and helping the Vampire King navigate the treacherous waters of his court. She was no longer just the girl from the streets. She was becoming someone more, someone who mattered in this world. But there were still moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, when the castle was quiet and the world outside was dark, she would lie awake in bed, wondering if she had made the right choice. Was this the life she wanted? Was this the life she was meant for? She had given up everything to help him, to be part of his world. But as she lay in the silence of her room, she realized that she was no longer the same girl who had stepped into this world. She was stronger now, more capable, and perhaps, just perhaps, she was exactly where she was meant to be. One evening, after a particularly tense council meeting, the Vampire King invited her to join him for a walk through the gardens. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a soft glow over the sprawling grounds. The air was cool, the scent of roses and night-blooming jasmine filling the air. As they walked, side by side, the Vampire King spoke of the future of his kingdom. The curse may be broken, but our work is far from over, he said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. There are many who still oppose us, and the road ahead will not be easy. But with you by my side, I believe we can rebuild. Marissa glanced up at him, her heart swelling with a mix of admiration and uncertainty. You've already done so much. I don't know if I'm the one who can help you rebuild, she said softly. He turned to her, his gaze intense. You already have, Marissa. You broke the curse. And with that, you have given us a future. Never doubt that. She smiled, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't just about her. It wasn't about saving his kingdom or defeating enemies. It was about something deeper, something that connected them both, a bond forged by choice and sacrifice. As they continued to walk, Marissa felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't have all the answers, and there was still much to be done. But for the first time since stepping into this world, she felt certain of one thing. She was no longer lost. She had found her place in this world, alongside the Vampire King. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but with him by her side, she knew she was ready to face it. The days seemed to blur together after the curse was broken, the weight of their victory settling heavily on both Marissa and the Vampire King. Though the world around them had changed, the sense of unease had not completely disappeared. Marissa still felt the lingering effects of her decision, the uncertainty of her place in this vast, ancient world. As the Vampire King's kingdom began to rebuild, Marissa found herself by his side more often than not, playing a crucial role in the kingdom's recovery. The halls of the mansion, once cold and empty, were now alive with activity. New faces appeared every day, loyal servants and advisors who had been waiting for the day the curse would be broken. Yet, despite the constant motion, Marissa couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that something still loomed in the distance. One evening, after another long day of meetings and plans for the kingdom's future, the Vampire King invited her to join him for a private dinner in one of the mansion's many grand dining rooms. The soft glow of candlelight flickered across the long, dark wood table, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Marissa sat across from him, her eyes meeting his, sensing the tension in the air. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice low and steady, though there was a hint of concern in his eyes. Marissa hesitated for a moment before answering. "I've been thinking about everything. The curse is gone. The kingdom is rebuilding, but I can't help but feel like there's more to this. More to my role here, in your world. I don't know where I fit anymore." The Vampire King studied her for a moment, his gaze piercing but not unkind. "You are more a part of this world than you realize. The curse may be broken, but the work we have ahead of us will shape the future of my kingdom. You are not just a spectator in this world, Marissa. You are a vital part of it." Marissa nodded, but there was still a sense of doubt gnawing at her. She had helped break the curse, but the weight of the Vampire King's kingdom felt heavier than she had anticipated. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted quietly. "I was just a girl before this, struggling to survive. And now, I'm standing beside you, helping rebuild an entire kingdom. It's all so much." The Vampire King leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "No one is ever truly ready for what fate has in store for them," he said. "But that does not mean you are not capable of facing it. You have already proven your strength. You broke the curse when no one else could. That was not by accident. You belong here, Marissa. You are not just a girl anymore. You are someone who shapes the future." His words lingered in the air, and for the first time in weeks, Marissa felt the weight of doubt begin to lift. Maybe she wasn't just an outsider in this world. Maybe she was meant to be here, meant to help shape this kingdom alongside him. The dinner passed in a blur, the conversation shifting to plans for the future of the kingdom, new alliances to be formed, and old enemies to be dealt with. Marissa listened intently, her mind racing with the possibilities. She knew that there was still much to be done, but for the first time, she felt like she was a part of something larger than herself. As the evening drew to a close, the Vampire King stood and extended a hand toward her. "Come with me," he said softly, his voice holding a sense of purpose. Marissa took his hand, following him through the winding corridors of the mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. He led her to the balcony that overlooked the gardens, the moon casting a pale light over the sprawling grounds below. The cool night air brushed against her skin as they stood side by side, looking out over the kingdom. "This is just the beginning," the Vampire King said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "The curse is broken, but the real work starts now. We will rebuild this kingdom. We will make it stronger than ever before. And you, Marissa, will be by my side as we do." Marissa looked out over the gardens, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She had made a choice when she stepped into this world, and now, she knew that she was ready for whatever came next. She had found her place in this kingdom, at his side. And together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Whatever comes next, I'll face it with you." The Vampire King turned to her, his dark eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. A flicker of something softer than before, something almost human. He gave her a small smile, the first one she had seen in weeks. "Good," he said, his voice low but filled with warmth. "Then let's begin." Marissa felt a sense of peace settle over her as they stood together, looking out over the future that awaited them. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt certain of one thing. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And with him, they would face whatever came next, together. The days after their decision to rebuild the kingdom were full of action. The Vampire King and Marissa worked together, planning their next moves. The kingdom was slowly coming back to life, but there was still so much to be done. Marissa had taken her place at the Vampire King's side, not as a passive observer, but as a leader in her own right. She helped manage the kingdom's resources, met with advisors, and even made decisions that would affect the future of the entire realm. It was an overwhelming responsibility, but the Vampire King was with her every step of the way, offering guidance when needed and always showing her the respect she had earned. Yet, as the weeks passed, Marissa couldn't help but feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had come from nothing, and now she was at the heart of a vampire kingdom, surrounded by centuries of power, history, and politics. She was constantly learning, constantly adapting to this strange new world. And while she was grateful for the Vampire King's support, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were still things about him, and about the kingdom, that she didn't fully understand. One evening, after a long day of meetings, the Vampire King asked her to join him for a walk in the castle's private gardens. The moon was high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the perfectly manicured lawns and hedges. The air was cool, and Marissa found herself at ease in the quiet of the night. They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of night creatures. Marissa glanced up at the Vampire King, wondering what he was thinking. He seemed calm, but there was a weight to his silence that suggested there was something more on his mind. "You've been distant lately," Marissa said softly, breaking the silence. "Is something wrong?" The Vampire King didn't look at her immediately. His gaze was fixed on the path ahead, his expression unreadable. "It's nothing," he replied after a moment. "The kingdom is still fragile. There are still enemies who want to see us fall. I must remain vigilant." Marissa nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She knew better than anyone how much he had sacrificed to rebuild his kingdom. But there was something in his tone that made her feel uneasy, as though there was something he wasn't telling her. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm here. I'm part of this now, too." The Vampire King turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, there was a softness in his gaze, a flicker of vulnerability that he rarely showed. "I know," he said quietly, "but some things are too dangerous for you to know. I don't want to drag you into it." Marissa's heart tightened at his words. "I've already chosen to be here, to help you," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "Whatever comes, I want to be a part of it." He was silent for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, he spoke again, his voice tinged with something almost like regret. "There is a danger that still lurks in the shadows, Marissa," he said, his tone serious. "A threat that I've been fighting for centuries, but one that I've kept from you. It is a force that could tear everything apart." Marissa's pulse quickened at his words. "What kind of threat?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King took a deep breath, as though preparing to say something he had long kept buried. "The curse was not the only thing that bound my family," he said, his voice low. "There is an ancient vampire faction, one that has been hunting us for generations. They have been biding their time, waiting for the moment to strike. And now that the curse is broken, they will come for us." Marissa's heart raced as she processed his words. She had known there were enemies out there, but this was something far greater than she had imagined. An ancient faction, waiting in the shadows, ready to destroy everything they had worked for. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice filled with determination. The Vampire King stopped walking and turned to face her. "We fight," he said simply. "But it will not be easy. They are powerful, and they have had centuries to prepare. This battle will require everything we have." Marissa's mind raced as she considered his words. She had come to the kingdom to help rebuild, to help the Vampire King restore his family's legacy. But now, she realized that the real challenge was just beginning. "We will stand together," she said, her voice steady. "We won't let them take everything we've worked for." The Vampire King's expression softened slightly, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I knew I could count on you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "But this will be the hardest fight we've ever faced." Marissa nodded, feeling the weight of what was to come. She had been through so much already, and she knew this was only the beginning. The fight ahead would be fierce, and there would be sacrifices along the way. But she was ready. She had found her place in this world, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. "We'll fight together," she said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. The Vampire King gave her a small, approving nod. Together, he agreed. As they walked back toward the castle, Marissa felt a sense of clarity settle over her. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was no longer just a bystander in this world. She was a part of it, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The next few days were a blur of preparation and tension. Marissa and the Vampire King had been working tirelessly, gathering allies, reinforcing the castle's defenses, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the ancient vampire faction. The kingdom had already begun to feel the effects of the growing threat. Whispers of their presence were spreading, and Marissa could feel the shift in the air. She wasn't the only one who knew that war was coming. As the Vampire King had said, the battle ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. The old factions were cunning, and they had spent centuries plotting, waiting for the moment to strike. But Marissa was determined not to let them succeed. She had already proven herself once, breaking the curse that had held the Vampire King's family in its grip for so long. Now, she would prove herself again. As the days passed, she felt herself growing into her new role. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a leader, an integral part of the kingdom's fight for survival. She sat with the Vampire King and his advisors, discussing strategy and tactics, and for the first time, she truly felt like she belonged. But there was still that sense of unease, a constant nagging feeling that wouldn't go away. Late one night, after another long day of planning, Marissa found herself walking the quiet halls of the castle, her mind racing. She needed to clear her head, to escape the pressure that had been mounting on her. As she wandered through the grand corridors, she found herself at the same balcony she and the Vampire King had stood on weeks ago, looking out over the gardens. The moonlight bathed the entire landscape in a soft, silvery glow, and for a moment, she allowed herself to relax, to breathe deeply, and forget the weight of the world that had been placed on her shoulders. But her peace was short-lived. A soft sound broke the stillness of the night, and Marissa turned to see the Vampire King standing in the doorway, watching her. She had never seen him look so distant. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something darker, something more guarded. "I thought you might be out here," he said, his voice low. "Is something wrong?" Marissa asked, her concern for him rising. She could sense that something was bothering him, but she didn't know what. He stepped outside, his presence imposing as always. "There is something I need to tell you," he began, his tone heavier than she had expected. "I've kept this from you, because I didn't want to burden you with the truth. But you deserve to know." Marissa's heart skipped a beat. "What truth?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. "The faction we are facing, the one that has been lurking in the shadows, is not just a group of rogue vampires. They are led by someone from my past. Someone I thought was lost forever." His words sent a chill through Marissa. "Who?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The Vampire King hesitated before speaking again, his gaze never leaving hers. "My brother." Marissa's breath caught in her throat. "Your brother?" she repeated, stunned by the revelation. The Vampire King nodded, his expression grim. "He was once a part of this kingdom, my closest ally. But he was consumed by power, by the darkness that runs through our blood. He left, disappeared for years, and now he has returned, more dangerous than ever." Marissa stood there, processing his words. She had known that the Vampire King had a complicated past, but this was something she hadn't expected. "You didn't know he was still alive?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, I thought he had been lost in battle. But now he has returned, and he wants to destroy everything we've built. He wants to take this kingdom from me, from us." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Marissa could feel the tension between them. She had thought the battle they were about to face was already formidable enough, but now, with the Vampire King's brother involved, it felt even more impossible. "How do we stop him?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The Vampire King looked at her, his gaze softening. "We fight. We have no other choice." He stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out as if to offer some kind of comfort, though it wasn't enough to ease the unease that had settled in her chest. "I need you, Marissa," he said, his voice quieter now. "You've already proven that you are stronger than I ever imagined. I need you by my side, now more than ever." Marissa's heart swelled at his words, and for a moment, she felt the weight of the bond they shared. She had chosen this life, chosen to stand by him and help him rebuild his kingdom. Now, more than ever, she understood the gravity of that decision. "I'll stay," she said firmly, her voice full of resolve. "I'll fight. With you. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The Vampire King gave her a small, approving nod, his eyes reflecting the same determination she felt within herself. Together, he echoed. As the two of them stood there, looking out over the kingdom they had fought to save, Marissa felt a sense of clarity settle over her. The battle ahead would be their greatest challenge yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to face it alone. She would stand by his side, no matter the cost. The future was uncertain, but with the Vampire King beside her, she was ready for whatever came next. The final battle was upon them. The Vampire King, Marissa, and their allies stood ready at the castle gates, preparing for the storm that was about to hit. His brother, once an ally, now a formidable enemy, had rallied his followers, and the clash between them would decide the fate of the kingdom. The castle, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed like a fortress under siege. Marissa stood beside the Vampire King, feeling the weight of the decision they had made together. She had come so far, from the frightened girl on the cold streets to a leader in a battle that would shape the future. Her heart was steady, though a part of her wondered if she was truly ready for what was to come. The Vampire King turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of pride and determination. "This is it," he said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. "We will fight with everything we have. You have proven your strength time and time again. Now, we stand together." Marissa nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "Together," she said firmly. "We'll do this. We have to." The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment, and a dark shadow appeared on the horizon. His brother's army, a sea of vampires and creatures of the night, was marching toward them. The battle had begun. The Vampire King raised his hand, signaling to the soldiers to take their positions. "Stand strong, for the kingdom," he commanded. His voice echoed across the battlefield, carrying the weight of centuries of history, of everything they had fought for. Marissa felt the intensity of the moment, the tension in the air as they faced the enemy. She knew that this was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future. As the two armies collided, the sound of metal clashing against metal, the screeching of vampires and creatures in the heat of battle, filled the air. Marissa fought with all the strength she had, her sword cutting through the darkness, her heart steady despite the chaos around her. She was no longer the girl who had stumbled into this world. She was a warrior, fighting alongside the Vampire King for the kingdom they both now called home. The Vampire King fought with unmatched precision, his movements like lightning, every strike calculated, every decision made in an instant. He was a force of nature, a ruler, but also a man who had lost so much. And now, he was willing to fight to the very end to protect what was left. Hours passed, the battle raging on, but the enemy began to falter. The Vampire King's forces, bolstered by Marissa's leadership, held strong. The tide was turning, but the final confrontation was still ahead. Marissa fought her way through the chaos, her eyes locking on the figure of the Vampire King's brother. He stood on a hilltop, watching the battle unfold below, his face twisted in anger. "It's time," the Vampire King whispered to Marissa, his voice barely audible over the sounds of war. "Let's end this." Together, they charged toward the hill, the enemy's forces trying to block their path, but they fought with a strength born of necessity, their resolve unshakable. When they reached the top, the Vampire King's brother was waiting for them. He was just as formidable as the Vampire King, his eyes cold and filled with centuries of bitterness. "You've come to stop me," he said, his voice laced with disdain. "But it's too late. The kingdom will fall, and there's nothing you can do to save it." The Vampire King stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You were once my brother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you've lost your way. You've let your thirst for power blind you. This is the end, for both of us." The two brothers clashed, their swords ringing through the night as they fought, a battle of wills, a battle of blood. Marissa stood back for a moment, watching them, her heart heavy with the weight of what had to be done. She had seen the pain in the Vampire King's eyes, the loss that had shaped him into the ruler he was now. And now, he was fighting for everything he had left. As the fight between the brothers raged on, Marissa knew that this moment would define everything. She rushed forward, her sword raised, ready to fight by the Vampire King's side. The battle between the brothers reached its peak, and in a final, decisive move. The vampire king struck his brother down. His brother fell to the ground, his eyes filled with rage and regret. The silence that followed was deafening. Marissa stood beside the vampire king, her heart racing. The battle was over, but the cost was heavy. The kingdom was saved, but at what price? The vampire king stood over his fallen brother, his face etched with sorrow. "It didn't have to be this way," he whispered. Marissa reached out to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did what you had to do," she said softly. "And you've protected everything you love." The vampire king turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time in years, the coldness in his gaze softened, replaced by something else, something more human. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here, for helping me rebuild everything. I couldn't have done it without you." Marissa smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "We did this together," she said. "Now it's time to rebuild." As they looked out over the battlefield, the remnants of the battle still fresh in the air, Marissa knew that the future was uncertain. But whatever came next, she would face it by his side, as his partner, as his equal. Together, they would rebuild the kingdom, stronger than before. The war was over. The curse was broken. And now, the real journey could begin. Vampire stories have captivated readers for centuries, and this tale is no exception. Set in a world of mystery, power, and ancient curses, this narrative follows a young woman who finds herself thrust into the dangerous world of vampires. With her blood being the key to breaking a centuries-old curse, she embarks on a journey alongside a powerful vampire king to reclaim his kingdom and defeat those who seek to destroy it. As the battle between brothers unfolds, secrets are revealed, and Marissa, once an ordinary girl, discovers her true strength in a world she never knew existed. This journey through a world of betrayal, loyalty, and dark magic is one of the most gripping vampire stories, filled with tension, romance, and danger.